I only went to my sister's place to drop something off. But when her friend opened the door, she whispered something that made my heart race. I didn't know it then, but that one sentence would change everything. I didn't plan on staying long that evening. I'd only stopped by my sister's place to drop off a small repair tool she'd forgotten at work. She wasn't home. Her text had said, "Just leave it on the counter. I'll grab it later." Simple enough. But when I rang the doorbell, someone else opened it. Her name was Yunha, my sister's landlord, or maybe just her friend. I was never entirely sure. I'd seen her once before, months back, briefly at a family dinner. But back then she was just another face at the table, calm, reserved, polite. This time she wasn't background. She filled the space. The scent of something faintly floral hung in the doorway, and the light from behind her softened the edges of her face. She wasn't wearing anything particularly striking, just a cream cardigan and simple slacks. Yet something about her presence made me straighten a little. "Oh, it's you," she said, her tone polite but distracted. "Your sister mentioned you might stop by." I nodded, suddenly aware of how unprepared I was for small talk. "Yeah." She asked me to drop this off. I held up the tool awkwardly. She smiled faintly, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes but still lingers in the air. "Come in for a second. She'll be back soon, I think." I should have said I was in a hurry. I should have just left the thing and gone. But instead I stepped inside. The living room was quiet except for the hum of a small heater near the couch. Books were stacked unevenly on the coffee table, a half-finished cup of tea beside them. The place felt lived in, warm but not messy. A kind of quiet that makes you lower your voice without knowing why. She noticed me looking around. "Your sister's been staying here a few weeks while her apartment's being fixed. I'm just keeping an eye on her plants for her." "Plants?" I asked, glancing toward the balcony. She smiled again, a real one this time. "She has a habit of collecting more than she can take care of." There was something effortless in the way she spoke. Calm, slightly amused, and yet tired underneath. I caught the faintest tremor in her hands when she reached for her tea. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I just wanted to see something human in her. I sat on the edge of the couch while she tidied up a few papers. She didn't ask me much, but every question she did ask felt intentional. "How's your work going?" "Still painting." Her tone wasn't curiosity. It was attentiveness, the kind that makes you feel seen without being inspected. And then came the silence. The kind that sits between two people who don't quite know each other but sense something familiar. I was suddenly aware of the ticking clock, the faint buzz of the heater, the sound of her steady breathing as she poured another cup of tea. When she offered it to me, I almost refused. But I didn't. "Thanks," I said, my voice lower than usual. Her fingers brushed mine, barely, as she handed me the cup. Not intentionally, but not entirely accidental either. It was the kind of touch that lingers longer in memory than it lasts in time. She looked at me then, really looked. Her eyes were calm, but there was something unreadable behind them, something heavy. And then, almost too quietly, she said, "You look a lot like your sister when you're thinking, but quieter." I didn't know what to say to that. It wasn't flirtation. It wasn't nothing either. Just personal. The kind of observation people only make when they've been watching a little too long. Before I could answer, the sound of my sister's car pulling up outside broke the moment. Yunha turned away first. "You should tell her the tea's getting cold," she said softly, setting her cup down. I nodded and stood, but something in me stayed seated, the part that wanted to ask what she meant, or why her voice trembled slightly at the end. That night, I kept replaying her voice in my head, like I missed something, or maybe wanted something. I told myself I wouldn't overthink it. The moment at my sister's place. The tea, her voice, the strange warmth that followed me home. It was probably nothing. Just a coincidence of timing and quiet. But a week later, my sister texted again. "Hey, can you swing by and help Yunha with the leaky faucet? I'm stuck late at work." I stared at the message longer than I should have. My first thought wasn't about the faucet. It was about her. When I arrived, it was early evening. the kind of fading light that turns everything soft and gold. Her apartment door was slightly open, and I heard the faint clatter of dishes from the kitchen. "Come in," she called, without turning around. She was dressed simply again. A navy blouse, sleeves rolled up, hair tied loosely at the back. There was a strand that kept falling near her face, and every few seconds, she'd brush it away impatiently. The faucet was dripping, slow and steady. I crouched down to take a look, grateful for something practical to focus on. She stood nearby, drying a plate, the sound of the towel against glass oddly rhythmic. "So," she said after a while, "you're good with tools. Not many people your age are." I smiled to myself. Just something I picked up from my dad. "Your sister mentioned he passed a few years ago." "Yeah." I tightened the wrench, the metal squeaking in protest. "He used to fix everything himself. I guess it rubbed off." There was a pause. When I glanced up, she wasn't looking at me. She was staring out the window, jaw tight. Her hand rested against the counter, fingers curled slightly. "I envy that," she said quietly. "The idea of someone who takes care of things before they fall apart." Her voice cracked, barely, but enough to make me stop. I wanted to ask what she meant, but instead, I tightened one last bolt and stood. "Should be fine now," I said, forcing a small smile. She nodded, returning one. "You're quick. I owe you tea again." I was about to decline, really I was, but she was already reaching for the kettle. We sat at the small dining table near the window. Outside, the sun had dropped below the buildings, leaving only the reflection of streetlights flickering through the glass. She stirred her tea slowly, though she didn't drink it. "You remind me of someone," she said after a while. "Yeah," I asked, trying to sound casual. "My younger brother. He used to come by unannounced, fix small things just to have an excuse to stay. He lives abroad now." There was a long pause after that. She smiled faintly, but it wasn't joy. It was something like nostalgia with a touch of ache. "I think," she continued, "I miss being needed." Something about that sentence landed in me like a quiet bruise. I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing, just watched the steam rise from her cup and dissolve into the dimness. The air felt heavier, not uncomfortable, just aware. A neighbor's laugh drifted faintly through the window, then faded. The sound of a spoon clinking against porcelain filled the silence. She glanced at me. "You're quiet today." I shrugged lightly. "You make it easy to listen." Her lips curved. Not a full smile, but enough to soften her expression. "Careful," she said, her tone teasing but gentle. "People might think you mean that." "Maybe I do." The words slipped out before I could pull them back. She froze, just for a second, then looked down, her fingers tightening around her cup. A soft exhale left her lips, part laugh, part sigh. "You shouldn't say things like that," she whispered, eyes still lowered. "You're too young to mean them." It wasn't what she said, it was how she said it. Not scolding, not distant, just tired, like she'd had to build a wall she didn't want to build. I wanted to tell her I wasn't just saying things, that there was something about the way she carried her silence that drew me in. But I didn't. Instead, I nodded. "You're probably right." She smiled faintly, but her eyes didn't match. For a few moments, we just sat there, both pretending we didn't notice how close our hands were on the table. The kettle clicked off again, a small sound that somehow broke the spell. She stood, gathering our cups, her back to me. I watched the curve of her shoulder, the stillness in her movements, the quiet she left in her wake. When she finally turned, she hesitated, just a heartbeat too long, before saying, "Tell your sister the faucet's fine." I nodded, stepping toward the door. As I reached for the handle, I felt her eyes on me, the kind of look that stops you mid-motion, even if you don't know why. She looked at me like she wanted to say something, but didn't, and that silence felt louder than words. It started raining the next time I saw her. Not a heavy, dramatic kind of rain, just the quiet, steady kind that fills every pause. I'd gone to the library near my sister's apartment to pick up a book I'd ordered, but when I walked in, I saw Yunha sitting behind the counter. I froze for a second, pretending to check my phone. She looked up right as I did, and for a moment, neither of us said anything. "You're here," she said finally, closing a book. "I didn't know you came by this place." I shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. "Didn't know you worked here." "Part-time," she said. "Keeps me occupied." She smiled faintly, and I noticed how tired she looked. Faint shadows beneath her eyes, hair loosely tied, sleeves rolled to her elbows. There was something both fragile and certain about her, like she'd been holding everything together for a long time. She gestured toward the counter. "You're dripping all over the floor. Guess I didn't expect rain." "I never do," she said softly, almost to herself. "It always finds you when you're unprepared." She handed me a small towel from behind the counter. Our fingers brushed again. Light, accidental, but enough to bring that familiar pulse back into the air. "Thanks," I murmured. She tilted her head, studying me as if deciding whether to say something more. Then she stood. "Come on. The back room's warmer. You'll catch a cold out here." The back room was small, walls lined with books waiting to be sorted, an old desk lamp casting a weak amber light. The smell of rain mixed with paper and dust. She set a small thermos down, poured tea into 2 mismatched cups, and slid one toward me. I took it, unsure if I was supposed to. "Do you do this for all customers?" Her lips curved slightly. "Only the ones who look like lost kids standing in the rain." "I'm 25. She laughed quietly, the sound soft, unguarded, gone too soon. "That's still a kid from where I stand." We talked for a while about work, art, nothing that really mattered. But between every word, there were pauses too long, glances that stayed too long. She told me about the new library renovations, about how she liked quiet spaces because they made her feel safe. "Safe?" I asked. She nodded. "Quiet means control. No surprises. No expectations." I didn't know what to say, so I said the truth. "I don't think people like us are meant to stay safe forever." She looked up sharply, meeting my gaze, and for a moment it was like something invisible locked between us. The air felt charged, but neither of us moved. Outside, thunder rumbled faintly, echoing through the shelves. "Yunha," I said quietly, "that day at my sister's, when you said I reminded you of someone." She interrupted, her voice firm but shaking slightly. "You shouldn't hold on to small things people say. They never mean as much as they sound." I wanted to argue, but then her phone rang. She flinched, a visible, involuntary reaction. The name flashed on the screen before she quickly turned it over. I caught only part of it. "Miho." Her voice softened. "Excuse me." She answered, stepping toward the shelves. I couldn't hear the words, but I could hear her tone. Low, careful, restrained. The kind of tone people use with someone they don't want to upset. When she hung up, her hand lingered on the phone a little too long. "Everything okay?" I asked. She nodded, forcing a small smile. "Old habit. Some calls still make my heart stop for a second." Something in her eyes, a mix of nostalgia and unease, made me want to reach out, just to steady her, just to make her stop pretending she was fine. But I didn't move. She must have felt my hesitation because she looked at me again, really looked, and the air between us shifted. I realized then how close we were. Her perfume, soft, familiar, reached me before her words did. "Sometimes," she whispered, "it's better not to get too close to people who see you clearly." "Too late," I said before I could stop myself. Her breath caught. For one suspended second, it felt like something was about to happen, like all the walls she'd built might finally break. My hand was halfway to hers when she said, barely above a whisper, "You should go now." And I did, but only my body left that room. For days after that night at the library, I avoided going near the place. Not because I didn't want to see her, but because I couldn't trust myself if I did. Her voice, her nearness, that one unfinished moment, it kept echoing in my head like the pause between two notes that never resolve. Then one afternoon, I got a message from my sister. "Yunha's asking if you could drop off that painting you promised me. She said she'll be home." Of course she would. And of course I said yes. It was almost evening when I arrived. The sky had that strange stillness before sunset, half light, half shadow. Her apartment door was slightly open again, and from inside came the faint sound of piano music. Not professional, just soft, hesitant. I knocked gently. She appeared in the doorway, barefoot, her hair loose this time, wearing an oversized gray sweater that hung just below her hands. "You came," she said, voice low. "Yeah. My sister said you needed the painting. She's still at work. I just told her I'd keep it safe for her." Her words were polite, but her tone, that careful, quiet tone, carried something else, something unsaid. I followed her in. The place looked different in the late light, warmer, but lonelier too. The piano music was playing from a small speaker near the window, something slow and melancholy. "Where should I put this?" I asked. "Anywhere's fine." She waved vaguely, then sat down at the table, fingers wrapped around a mug she wasn't drinking from. "You've been avoiding the library." The way she said it, calm, but certain, made my pulse stutter. "I've been busy." "Busy?" she repeated, almost like she was testing the word. "Is that what we're calling it?" I set the painting down and turned toward her. "You told me to go." "I did." She looked at me then, really looked. "And you did." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The music in the background filled the space we didn't know how to. I sat across from her, elbows resting on the table, trying to find something casual to say, but everything that came to mind felt small, dishonest. Finally, I said, "You don't have to pretend it didn't mean anything." Her eyes flickered, but she didn't look away. "What do you think it meant?" "That I wasn't the only one who felt it." Silence. Just that, silence. Her breath came out slow, deliberate. "You're young. You feel things deeply. They pass." "That's not fair," I said quietly. "You feel it too. You just don't let yourself." She stood abruptly, her chair scraping the floor. "Don't tell me what I feel." The sharpness in her voice wasn't anger. It was fear wearing armor. She walked toward the window, staring out at the city lights. Her reflection wavered in the glass, distant, fractured. After a while, she said, softer now, "You think I haven't wanted to?" Her voice trailed off. "But wanting isn't always allowed to mean doing." I stepped closer, not enough to touch her, but enough for her to feel the air shift. "Then what are we doing?" Her shoulders tensed. She turned, and for the first time, there was nothing composed about her. Just a woman caught between two impossible truths. "I don't know," she whispered. "I don't know what we're doing." We stood there, facing each other, the room small enough that I could hear her heartbeat in the quiet. The music had stopped, but the echo of it still lingered. I wanted to reach out, not to cross a line, just to stop her from retreating behind it again. But something in her eyes held me still. There was so much she wasn't saying about loneliness, about years spent holding herself together, about wanting something she wasn't supposed to want. Finally, she said almost to herself, "You make it hard to stay calm, and you make it hard to leave." Her lips parted slightly, like she might say something back, but no words came. Just a tremor of breath that felt too intimate for silence. The tension between us wasn't sharp anymore. It was heavy, aching, tender, the kind that comes from knowing you've already crossed a line you can't unsee. She took a step back, eyes glistening in the dim light. "You should go," she whispered again, "before I forget who I'm supposed to be." I nodded, though my feet didn't move. She didn't say anything else, just looked at me, like she was already mourning something we never even had. After that night, she disappeared. Not completely. She still lived in the same apartment, still worked at the library, but she was gone in every way that mattered. No replies to my texts, no accidental meetings, not even a glance when I passed by the window where she used to wave from. It was as if that conversation, that charged silence between us, had burned something down she didn't want to rebuild. A week passed, then two, and just when I'd convinced myself it was over, I found her again. It was late evening, and the rain had returned, harsher this time. My sister had sent me to pick up a few boxes she'd left at Yunha's place. I almost said no, but when I got there, I saw the faint glow of her living room light through the curtains. I hesitated before knocking. A part of me wanted her not to answer, to stay a ghost I could keep imagining. But the door opened. She looked different. Her hair was loose, her eyes softer, her usual careful expression replaced by something tired, almost fragile. "Hi," I said, my voice barely steady. She exhaled. "You shouldn't be here. I came for my sister's boxes. They're in the hall." I nodded, but I didn't move to take them. I just stood there, drenched from the rain, watching her. The air between us felt heavy with everything we hadn't said. "Can I come in for a minute?" I asked quietly. She hesitated, then stepped aside. Inside, the lights were dim, the sound of rain soft against the windows. She moved slowly, like someone carrying too much weight in invisible places. "You've been avoiding me," I said finally. "Yes." "Why?" "Because I don't like what I've become around you." The honesty in her voice stopped me cold. She turned, crossing her arms. A small, protective gesture. "You think it's easy for me to feel this way about someone who makes me remember what I tried to forget?" I swallowed. "What did you try to forget?" Her eyes lifted, and for once, she didn't hide. "That I can still want something I can't have." The words cut deeper than I expected. For a long time, neither of us moved. The only sound was the soft drip of rainwater from my jacket onto the floor. Then she walked toward a shelf, pulled out a small framed photograph and handed it to me. It was of her and a man, maybe late 30s, standing beside a car, laughing. He had his arm around her shoulders. She looked younger, brighter. "His name was Miho," she said quietly. "We were married for 12 years. He died 3 years ago. Heart attack out of nowhere." I looked at the photo again, then at her. "I'm sorry." She nodded, staring somewhere past me. "He was the last person who ever saw me without all my walls. After he was gone, I promised myself I wouldn't let anyone get that close again. And then, I showed up," I said softly. Her lips twitched, not quite a smile. "You reminded me of him at first. The way you listen. The way you make silence feel safe." I didn't know how to respond. My throat felt tight, like the room had shrunk around us. She set the photo back down carefully, as if afraid it might break. "I thought I was past wanting someone to see me, but you made me realize I've just been hiding." I stepped closer, my voice barely above a whisper. "You don't have to hide with me." Her eyes met mine then, and for the first time, there was no distance, no deflection, no polite restraint. Just raw, human vulnerability. She took a breath, slow, deep, trembling, like she hadn't allowed herself to in years. And then something shifted. The air, the silence, everything. She didn't touch me, didn't say a word. But she didn't look away either. For a heartbeat, she wasn't my sister's friend, or a woman trying to stay composed. She was just Yunha, a person standing at the edge of her own loneliness, finally letting someone see her. And for the first time, she looked at me without fear. After that night, nothing felt the same. Not the air. Not the way I saw her. Not even the way I saw myself. We didn't talk about what happened. Not with words, anyway. But silence between us had changed shape. It was no longer distance. It was something that held us, something alive. Days passed quietly, yet I found myself pulled back to her apartment again and again. Always under the excuse of helping with small things, carrying groceries, fixing a broken lamp, bringing her books from the store. She never asked, but she never turned me away either. Every time I stood at her door, she would pause before opening it, like she was deciding which version of herself to let me see. That evening, the world outside felt slow and blue, clouds thick, air heavy. When I entered, she was sitting by the window, sketching something in a small notebook. Her hair was tied up this time, loose strands framing her face. "You draw?" I asked. She smiled faintly, closing the notebook. "Not really. I just try to remember things before they fade." "What were you drawing?" She hesitated, then turned the notebook toward me. It was a sketch of the small garden behind her building, the one we'd cleaned together a few weeks ago. But in the drawing, there were two figures, one sitting, one standing, both blurred at the edges, like she hadn't finished them. I looked up at her. That's us, isn't it? Her gaze met mine, calm but unreadable. Maybe. Or maybe it's just what I wish we looked like. A soft laugh escaped me, nervous and too quiet. What do you wish we looked like? She didn't answer. She just stood, crossed the room, and stopped in front of me. The light from the window brushed against her cheek, and for a second I could see how tired she was. How beautiful that tiredness made her. You remind me that I'm still alive, she whispered. The words struck something deep inside me, a place that had been waiting for her voice all along. I reached for her hand, carefully, afraid to break the moment. She didn't pull away. Her fingers were warm, trembling just slightly against mine. You don't have to hide from that anymore, I said. Her eyes softened, like she wanted to believe me, like part of her already did. Then, slowly, she stepped closer, closing the last bit of space between us. The rain started outside again, gentle, steady. And then, she kissed me, not with hesitation, not with fear, but with the kind of quiet hunger that comes from years of holding everything in. It was soft, trembling, unbearably real. For a moment, the world didn't exist. Only her breath, her warmth, the taste of rain still clinging to the air. When she finally pulled away, her forehead rested against mine. This shouldn't have happened, she whispered, voice breaking. Then tell me to stop, I said, my voice shaking too. But she didn't. She just stood there, breathing, eyes closed, as if the truth of what we were doing was too heavy to name. After a long silence, she said, barely audible, "You make me feel like time is starting again." My chest ached at that, because for me it had. We didn't say anything else. The rest of the night passed in fragments. Quiet looks, small touches, the sound of rain filling the spaces where words would have ruined everything. When I finally left, the world felt too big. I walked home in silence, her scent still on my hands, her voice still echoing in my head. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, whether she'd close the door again, or pretend it never happened. But I knew one thing: we'd crossed a line we couldn't step back from. And somewhere between guilt and desire, something real had begun to take root. Something neither of us could control anymore. It's been months since that night, the one where everything quietly shifted. And yet, every time I walk past her street, I still slow down. Not to see her, just to remember. People think falling for someone older is about thrill or fantasy, like it's some kind of rebellion. But they don't understand the quiet parts, the ache that comes with it, the stillness that feels like home. After that night, we didn't talk for a while. She needed space, and I didn't know how to exist without the pull of her orbit. Sometimes I'd text, something simple, "Did you eat?" Or "How's the garden?" just to feel like the thread between us hadn't broken completely. She'd reply hours later, sometimes a day. "Fine. Busy." And once, "Don't worry about me." That one hurt, because I did worry. Not out of pity, but because loving her had become a quiet kind of gravity I couldn't escape. One evening, weeks later, she finally called. Her voice was softer than I remembered. "Can you stop by?" I did. Of course I did. When I got there, she wasn't the same woman who had once held the world on her shoulders. She looked lighter, but not in a happy way. More like she had let go of something heavy, something that had defined her. She handed me a cup of tea and sat across the table. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then she said, "I kept thinking what happened that night was a mistake." I nodded, staring at the steam curling between us. "And now?" Her eyes lifted, calm, steady. "Now I think it was the first honest thing I've done in years." The air seemed to still around us. "I spent so much time building walls," she continued, "to keep life neat, predictable. But you—" She stopped herself, looking away. "You made me feel everything I tried to bury." I didn't know what to say. My throat tightened, heart caught somewhere between hope and fear. "You didn't do anything wrong," I whispered. She gave a small, tired smile. Maybe not. But we both know love like this doesn't fit anywhere. It doesn't ask permission. It just happens. She was right. It wasn't the kind of love that made sense to anyone but us. It wasn't loud or impulsive. It was something that unfolded in silence, between shared glances and half-finished sentences. We didn't try to define it anymore. We just were. Sometimes I'd come by, fix the leaky tap, or have dinner with her. Sometimes she'd send me home early, pretending she wasn't looking as I left. There were no declarations, no promises, just an understanding, quiet, unspoken, real. And in that space, I learned something about love I never had before. It doesn't always ask to be named. Sometimes it just asks to be felt. Now, when people ask if I've ever been in love, I think of her. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was nervous. The way her voice softened when she said my name. I think of how she looked at me that last time I saw her. Standing at her doorway, a faint smile on her lips. She said, "You changed how I see myself." And I told her, "You changed what love means to me." She didn't answer. She just nodded, eyes glistening, and whispered, "Take care of yourself." That was the last time we spoke. But even now, on quiet nights, I still hear her voice. Soft, unhurried, filled with everything we couldn't say out loud. I didn't just fall for an older woman. I fell into something rare, something true. And maybe that's what real love is, not forever, not perfect. Just something that changes you in ways time can't erase. Sparkle CTA YouTube ending. If the story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?